I'm going to offer just a brief word of prayer and then take a few moments to introduce our persons of tonight and also to read a text that is reflective of our conversation and topic of education. Let's pray. Lead us, O God, and we shall be led as we seek to engage in fruitful dialogue regarding education and particularly educational system in Montclair. We thank you, Lord, for those who are present and those that are yet on their way. We pray, oh God, that you will help us to grow in our dialogue. Bless our leaders and this township who seek to provide a context and that nurtures our children in the way that they would go. So thank you, Lord, for what you have put in place. Now make our plans work together for that which brings pleasure to your heart. In the name of our God, amen, amen, and amen. I want to offer up as a text this very powerful section in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4 through 9. It is also known as the Shema. And it reads simply this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorpost of your house and on
You all right, Mama?
What I want to lift up with this text is that education begins in the heart and in the home. And that's what is lifted up in this text as we see the role and responsibility of educating our children in our community begins within our own households and within our hearts. There is a commandment that was given to the people of God, and they were expected to keep covenant relationship with this, that the greatest commandment that is given to each of us is to love God with our heart, mind, and soul, is to love our neighbor even as ourselves. And the expectation is that they would not only keep these words in their heart, but they would share the faith, this legacy with their children and their children's children, so that when they walk in the community or wherever they go, that this word is in their heart and in their action. And we see this is a text that calls for unity, that we recognize that God is our source of life, health, strength, and well-being. And although we come from different faith perspectives and different understandings of who God is, this text calls for a sense of unity to be about one purpose, and that is to share who we are and whose we are. And the word is not only to be in our heart, but also on the doorposts and on our foreheads, which makes this learning process comprehensive. And so as we gather tonight to talk about educational process, we affirm this understanding that education begins in our homes and in our hearts, and then we seek to train and equip our children and our family members to be able to relate with one another in the spirit of love and also in the spirit of unity. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. It is my joy and privilege to introduce to you these four outstanding leaders who come to us today to lead us in a very important conversation. They all have different roles, and so I am very excited. I've had the opportunity to work with them and to get to know them, and I pray that you will have the opportunity to get to know them in a deeper way through dialogue, through conversation, through questions. I'm going to introduce the first three persons Miss Melanie Deisher, Miss Laura Herzog, and also Miss Phaedra Ruddock Dunn. And then after they have been provided with 10 minutes, if they choose to take those 10 minutes to share what their journey has been like and what their area of focus is, I will come back and introduce Mr. Sergio Gonzalez, who will be their moderator, our moderator for the evening, and will engage our three panelists in conversation. So let me just take a few minutes to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ms. Laura Herzog, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Noodle Partners Incorporated, a leader in the educational technology field. In addition to her legal roles, she created and leads the company DEI strategy. Laura was previously General Counsel at William Patterson University, at Hunter College, City University, New York, where she also served as Dean of Faculty and Staff Relations, and previously as the Inaugural Dean for Diversity and also Compliance. She's a litigator by training and has held a federal clerkship in the Southern District of New York before practicing at the law firms of Paul Weiss, Ripton, and Garrison, as well as Loeb and Loeb. She also spent several years on the faculty of New York University Law School and Cornell University, and was a director at Chadbourne and Park and Credit Suisse. Laura enjoys working with her colleagues to design creative solutions for Noodle's partners and students. Away from her work, Laura has also been a board member of New Jersey Council for the Humanities, Case of New York, the New York Women's Foundation. She was president of the Montclair Board of Education, a member of Montclair Achievement Gap Advisory Panel, a vice chair of Montclair Civil Rights Commission, and a member of the Princeton Charter Club Graduate Board of Governors. She and her family live in Montclair. She was raised as a proud graduate of Montclair High School, as well as Princeton University, where she received an AB East Asian Studies Chinese. She also is a graduate of Montclair State University, where she received a Master's of Art and History, and the University of Michigan, where she graduated with a JD cum laude. We also welcome tonight Miss Melanie Deisher, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. You certainly can clarify it when you come to us. She is a 14-year resident of Montclair. She's originally from Reading, Pennsylvania, and the mother of 3 boys at Montclair Public School System, ranging in the ages of 12 to 18. She's an occupational therapist by training, and she has been recognized as a leader in efforts to improve the district's response to dyslexia. She began her advocacy focus on the issue of special needs, but has since learned the many more of our children who are facing challenges in basic literacy, and that literacy is the cornerstone of equity. We also welcome tonight Ms. Phaedra Ruddock Dunn, who is a licensed clinical social worker, therapist, a New Jersey certified school social worker who has worked in private practice and in the school setting, both at K through 12 level and also post-secondary education. She's originally from the area where I am dwelling now, Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan. She's a parent of a 6th grader like me. We share that in common in the MPS system. She's the co-chair of School Action Team for Partnership SATP, and of the Montclair PTA Council Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, and a co-founder of the group Montclair Moms of Color. We are delighted to have these 3 outstanding women who will join us, and I'm going to ask them in this order to come and to share. First, Ms. Laura Herzog, if you will come and share, and then also we'll have Ms. Melanie Deisher and also Ms. Phaedra Ruddock. We'll provide 10 minutes for each of you all to share the areas of literacy, special needs. I'm asking Ms. Herzog to begin first, because she's going to offer for us an overview of the Montclair educational system, being Montclair bred and also having served in many capacities. I am thrilled to have these women. I've had the joy of talking with them, and I pray that after they have done you will be able to have a profound appreciation for them too. So let's begin our dialogue tonight. Come and share even now, Miss Laura Herzog.
Hello, Pastor. Thank you for having me.
And by the way, I have made each of you co-host.
Okay, great. I do not have any slides, so you do not need to worry about me fumbling with technology. So I think we should be good. As Pastor Singleton said, I grew up here. I went through the public schools here, as did my 4 brothers and sisters. So I have a fair amount of experience with the Montclair Public Schools. And then ultimately I was on the board for 4 years, and I was the president for 2 of those 4 years. So I want to go through a few of the key things about the Montclair schools structure, because I think it's really important, especially since my 2 colleagues on the panel here are interested in being on the Board of Education. I think it's important for people in Montclair to understand the structure of how the schools work and who's responsible for what. So the most important thing to understand is that the Montclair Board of Education has oversight. They set the policies for the schools. They ultimately approve the budgets, but they don't run the schools on a day-to-day basis. The only person who actually works for the Board of Education is the superintendent. And that's a key thing that people don't understand. They think that the board is telling teachers what to do or telling principals what to do. If they did that, that would actually be a violation of their ethical promise that they swear when they join the board. So the Board of Education has 7 people. Now that we're moving to an elected system, it's going to, I believe, ultimately have 9. So right now, though, it's 7 people who were appointed by the mayor. It was 6 people who were appointed by the mayor and 1 person who joined after Dr. Davis passed away. So then you have the central administration. You have the superintendent and the people like the people in charge of busing, the people in charge of technology, the people in charge of pupil services. They're all based in the building on Valley Road in the central administration working with the superintendent. And then you have the buildings. And in the buildings, you have the principals and the teachers and the vice principals and the custodians. All of those people work together every day to try and support the kids who are coming to the schools every day. But it's really important to understand that a lot of what gets done in the schools is being done on a building basis. There are a few things that are decided at the policy level. Then there are a lot of things that are decided by the superintendent for the school system in general. But then a lot of things that are decided simply in the building. And it's really, really important, going back to what the pastor said about education starting in the home. It's tremendously important that parents understand, parents, guardians, loved ones, those who are responsible for children's education, that the more involved they are in the lives of the buildings where their children are, the better their children will do. That is simply a fact, because they'll know more about what's going on a day-to-day basis with their kids. They'll know how the policies are playing out in real time in their schools, and they'll know the people who are taking care of their kids, and those people will pay more attention to them if they're more involved. And that is just a cold, hard fact that I wish more people in the community understood. It's not about favoritism necessarily. I don't think it's conscious in that way, but I have seen it over and over again that the families that are more involved in the schools are heard more clearly. And that is something that people need to understand, and our community needs to understand if it wants to have a voice in how education works in this town. The other thing I want to say is that all of those entities appropriately, the teachers and the custodians have a union, the head custodians have a union, the principals have their own union. The only entity that only represents the kids is the Board of Education. That's what the members of the Board of Education swear to do. They swear an oath to act in the best interests of the children in the school district. And they're the only ones who do that. So who you decide to be on the Board of Education is tremendously important. One of the things that's important to understand as well is the need for a balance, in my view, of people on the board who have children in the school versus who don't. For a couple of years, almost nobody on the board had kids in the district. They had no idea what was actually happening in the schools. Now, I am an advocate of having people on the board, including people on the board who don't have kids in the schools, because we're all taxpayers. And even if you don't have children in the school, you're paying taxes. It makes sense for you to be represented and have a voice on the board. But in my view, given all the policy decisions that affect the lives of our kids day to day, it cannot be the case again that we have 6 out of 7 board members who do not have children in the school, and who in some cases haven't had kids in the schools for 30 years, and or took their kids out of the schools and sent them to private school, which is every parent's right and is a good thing to do if that's the right thing for your kid. But if you're that disconnected from the public schools, I think it's hard to know what needs to be happening to make them effective. And the last thing I want to say, because I want to hopefully give a couple of extra minutes to my 2 colleagues on the panel, is it's really important to understand some numbers about the budget of the Montclair school system. And there's a number that people hear a lot that I think you need to break down to really understand how things work. The budget is ballpark $130 million for the district. And so what you will often, and there are 2 budgets. There's the capital budget, which is to build things, that's separate. This is the operating budget. So it's for teachers and books and transportation, all of those things. You hear the number 130 million, it sounds huge. And then you may have heard the number, we spend $19,000 per student in Montclair. Well, how does that number get put together? Essentially what that is you take the $130 million budget and you divide it by about 7,000 students, and you come up with $19,000 per student. But practically speaking, about 85+% of the budget goes to salary and benefits for employees, which makes sense because that's the great resource of our schools, right? But that's $111,000, okay? Then about 9 to 10% goes to other fixed costs, like out-of-district placements for children who can't be served properly in the district, busing, things like that. That's another $13 million off the top, fixed costs. So what are you left with for the things that the board is deciding with the superintendent to do in a discretionary way? You're left with about $6 million. And if you divide $6 million by the 7,000 students, the number you come up with is $928. So what the board is really working with is $928 of discretionary money per student. And discretionary, so you understand, that's whether or not to buy computers. That's whether or not you have a special reading program that is desperately needed so that our kids can get up to speed by 3rd grade. Whether or not you have a dyslexia program. All of those things, whether or not you have AVID, a program that helps students get organized and study better in high school. All of those things have to be spent on an average of $928 per student in our district. And that's not a lot of money. And there are reasons we can talk, I think we'll talk about later, about funding and budgeting, about why those numbers are actually quite low if you think about it that way. But that's a number I want you to think about when you're thinking about the Board of Education and when you're thinking about our district and when you're thinking about who the people are who you want, who are going to be stewarding that money for our kids, is the district doesn't really have $19,000 per student to spend. It really has more like $900 per student to spend. And you want to make sure you have people who are really, really thoughtful about how they're going to spend that to make sure that there's a level playing field for all of our kids in the school so they can all have the future that we want them to have. So I will wrap up, and I've left 1 minute and 45 seconds to be split between my colleagues. I'll turn it back to Pastor Singleton, and you can move on to the next speaker.
Thank you. That was fantastic. You covered a lot of ground in this short period of time. I look forward to hearing more dialogue with you, facilitated by our brother, Mr. Sergio Gonzalez. We're going to look for Melody Dyson to come, and then after she comes, we'll have Phaedra. Or did I say the opposite before?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Sugg, for a very informative presentation, and I appreciate your knowledge. My name is Melanie Deitcher, and as you know, I have 3 kids in the district, and that's where my journey started with my boys. And my middle son, Luke, from an early age, he was the kid who left the pre-K not knowing his letters of the alphabet. We showed up in kindergarten, had a bunch of concerns, and the line we heard over and over again was, "Don't worry, he'll grow out of it. Don't worry, he'll grow out of it." by first grade, he still was really behind in reading and not making very many gains, but we still heard the same story. He'll grow out of it. He's just a slow learner. Eventually he'll catch up. And Luke is a joyful boy. And by that time, by the end of first grade, he went from being a happy kid to riding the bus to school. We went down to Nishwain, to a boy that first I had to drive him to school because he wouldn't get on the bus anymore. And then there became the point where I could no longer get him into the building. I had to reach into the car and unseatbelt him and carry him into the building. Is how much he hated showing up at school because he felt stupid. He felt less than. There's baskets in the school with the different levels of books. You know, why am I having to take from the B basket when my whole class is in the the X basket? And the kids, you know, teasing him, as kids will. This went on and asking the district for help, and then the same old line. And finally, we are fortunate enough to have enough resources to pay for a private evaluation, which we did. And he was found to have significant dyslexia. And a lot of the signs he presented with all along, not knowing your alphabet, difficulty rhyming, difficulty with rhythm stuff, it all points to like there should have been somebody to be able to say, hey, maybe he's not doing so well. But the district did indeed accept the evaluation and agreed he needed some reading specialists to work with him. But then the other really shocking thing was down at Nishwain, we had to wait probably another 4 months for the district to hire a reading specialist. And looking back now, to me, that's totally shocking because dyslexia affects about 20% of the population. And that on top of the fact that Nishwain is a Title I school, which means 25% or more of the kids are entitled to free or reduced lunch, which means there's an impact because you can assume some of those children don't have access to early literacy opportunities like pre-kindergarten, pre-K. So we had to wait another several months for the reading specialist to show up. And now in hindsight, you know, so he's halfway through second grade. He missed a huge window of opportunity when your brain, because of the notion that, like how we know that kids learn languages very quickly when they're young versus like our old brains, it takes us forever. Like that notion of neuroplasticity when you're a young person, we lost a significant window of him being able to approach more normal levels of reading. And he's doing much better now. And, you know, he's happy again and he's doing pretty well in school, but I'll never know like how far he could have gone if he had gotten help appropriately. So this, you know, this really motivated me. I heard a speaker, a professor from up at MSU, Dr. Lavani, speak about the notion that when we go outside the system to get our kids help, which I did for Luke, we don't fix the system for other kids. And this really was like a lightning bolt and motivated me. Like if dyslexia does indeed affect 1 in 20 or 20% rather, there's plenty of kids sitting at all these schools falling behind and not getting help. So this led me on this journey, I guess, of advocacy. And I guess I'd like to share some of what I've learned along the way. So this isn't just an issue in Montclair. Nationally, the National Assessment of Educational Progress in 2019, the most recent study, a shocking, only 34% of the nation's children in 4th grade are reading at or above a proficient level. In Montclair, unfortunately, the scores reflect this national average, and the African-American community is especially impacted. The last kind of statewide assessment we did was in 2019, and only 44% of African-American kids in elementary school were reading the category is meeting or exceeding expectations. So the flip side of that means only 56% of elementary school kids are not meeting or only partially meeting grade level expectations. We need to expect our school district to do better. There's a lot of reasons for this to be happening. We are born wired to speak, not wired to read. The reading only became important when the printing press was invented in the 1400s. So throughout time, like into the early 1900s, the notion was we learn to read by surrounding ourselves with books, and we will naturally learn how to read. And if we have a lot of books in our home, we'll get the hang of it. And in the past 40 years, research has found this simply not to be true. So while there's dyslexia at the far end of the spectrum, which is 20% over here, about 30 to 40% on this side, people learn to read easily. You know, these are the kids that show up in kindergarten, pick up a book, and it comes naturally. But not even talking about dyslexia, this middle 50% of kids need explicit instruction in how to make the letter they see on the page relate to the sound they hear. And this is a huge body of research and teaching philosophy called the science of reading. The other statistic to know, like we said, is worldwide, 20% of the population does have dyslexia, and this also holds true in Montclair. It crosses racial, social, socioeconomic, and ethnic lines, but early identification and effective intervention, most children can achieve normative levels of reading. It's important to identify these struggling readers early, not only to be able to read effectively, because if you can't read effectively, it begins to result in this huge knowledge and vocabulary gap. And like Ms. Herzog referred to, you really need to be done with the business of reading by the beginning of third grade, because that's when the expectation is you're finished and now you're reading to learn. And even how materials are presented in textbooks in the early grades, 80% is pictures, 20% text. By third grade, that's been 80% text and 20% pictures. So if you don't know how to access it, you're truly lost. And that's when we see widening gaps of vocabulary and knowledge. And that's where we see kids really fall apart and stop being able to access higher levels of academic achievement. The NAACP, and I will have to read this, in 2014 came up with recognizing this national crisis, has a resolution. And you guys can look it up online to read the whole thing, because it's a little bit lengthy, but the end is, therefore, be it resolved, it is imperative and appropriate that the NAACP join the fight to raise awareness, support legislation, and the need for more appropriate accommodations for children of color to ensure that all African-American children receive screening, tutoring, and proper remediation services in school to combat this civil rights issue of our time. So those are powerful words, and most state NAACPs are working on this issue. And in Montclair, the Montclair NAACP formed an NAACP Dyslexia Task Force. And along with a bunch of folks like the Civil Rights Commission, CPAC, a bunch of very passionate parents, like getting together and really talking to the district about what needed to change. And I do have to say, I'm really proud of the district. This fall, they initiated this, it's called Acadience. It's a universal screener. So every child in K through 6th grade will be screened for early reading difficulties. This is a huge win for Montclair, and we should all be proud of the district. This is being followed up by the district providing training for teachers, all elementary school teachers, in RISE, which is Research Informed Instruction for Success and Equity. So as people in the district, we need to, support the district and continue to encourage the teachers to embrace this new assessment and this new type of teaching, because it could really change things for so many of these kids that have gotten left behind. It's like a whole kind of cultural shift or paradigm shift, because it's choosing to catch the children before they fail. And certain pathways will only ever be available to children who are fully literate. It's important to get this right, so a critical mass of our students are moving into academic classes and able to access the knowledge economy that we live in now. We can prevent reading failure through early identification and science-driven practices in the classroom. So the money thing that also that Ms. Herzog brought up, I feel like that's important to address, because if you want to save money in a district as a society, we need to teach all kids to read. It actually saves money for a school district. With early identification and prevention programs, the number of children placed in special ed can be reduced by up to 70%. And it actually costs twice as much to serve a student in special ed as it does in general ed. That would result in a huge amount of savings for embracing early screening and the correct teaching methods. If we look societally, we need people who can move into a knowledge economy to fully participate. And there's a huge intersectionality between low literacy rates and the criminal justice system, the school to prison pipeline. And I recently read a report, it's back from 1993, but it established a causal link that recidivism was reduced from 70% to 16% by teaching inmates to read. So across the spectrum, like teaching kids, and in this case, adults, how to read is really, I can't express it enough, and I feel so passionate about it. The most important thing, the motherlode of all ability to move forward. And I'm not sure if that's a good ending point, but I think I exceeded my 10 minutes. I'd like Phaedra to have time.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Ms. Herzog. And I think we can wait for questions, but thank you so much. So I think for me, one of the point of me and how again, I worked in education for years before I came into district. But when my son transferred into the district, he went to private school, but my dream for him was always to go to Montclair public schools. We hadn't moved to Montclair yet. But I wanted him to be involved in the magnet school system. I went to a magnet school in high school. So I was like, this is amazing. He can sort of get to know himself through what he does and identifying. It was a great experience for me. But when we came, my son was in 3rd grade, and he came from a private school, and that private school got out at the beginning of June. And so by the time he started school in September, this idea of learning loss, what happens to students, throughout the summer. And because he was just going into 3rd grade, we let him do a camp. His first week in elementary school, every day I checked in because he went from a very small setting to a much larger setting coming into Montclair Public Schools. I think the largest amount of students he had in his classroom was 13. And so he's in a class of 21, 22, and every day I'm checking in with him. And so one day he comes home and he's like, oh, I took this test and it had for math, and it had, 60 questions on it. And well, how did it feel? I don't know. I said, well, was it important? I wasn't aware you were taking this test. He's sort of like, I don't know, Mom. It was just, I went with some lady, I took a test, and, I don't know anything. And so each day I sort of ask him more questions, and then eventually, maybe on that Tuesday, he says, well, they said I'm going to be in small group. And I said, you're going to be in small group? I was confused because I hadn't spoken to anyone. Also of note is my son he has always done well academically. And so I was confused. And so what the school didn't know was I was a school administrator at that time. Helping, one of the administrators running a high school, and I had been in education at that time. So I reach out to the principal, hey, this is what my child is saying. I'm a little confused by what's taking place. And so the principal tries to explain, and I said, well, no, because someone has explained to my son that he's going with this woman. I was able to say the names. And so the principal and I had to have a very difficult conversation because I questioned her in a number of things. I also ran a child study team for like 8 years. And so I was like, well, this sounds like RTI. This sounds like there's something going on. And I was like, you know, I had to ask her questions. Can I please have a copy of the test that you gave him? Can you please let me know, did you guys do review before you assessed your students? Did all students get this assessment, or did he get this assessment because he was a new student? And so I had to ask a number of questions to sort of get to a place where we figure this thing out. So now you're saying that my child has issues with math based on a test, and he's been in the classroom 7 days, 8 days. Please explain your policy around that to me. And why would you give a child a test the first week of school of that nature, right? Because you're trying to figure out, right? I get placement tests. I understand we want to do within 10 days or, you know, whatever the magic number is you may be using. But again, asking her, what did you do review? So we went back and forth via text, and we get on the phone and I ask a number of questions. And at some point I revealed to her, I'm an educator as well. So I very much understand the system. Are you saying you put my son in an RTI process based on his first few days of school? And so exactly. So we get to this point and I'm like, did you look at his sort of like his portfolio from his previous school? Did you call and ask me questions? Here are things that I find concerning. And so I said to her, here's what I can tell you. If my son did have issues in math, I would have let you know because I would have had an awareness of them. Furthermore, if he does need extra help, I have no problem with that. If we needed to go to an IEP, but here are my concerns. You didn't assess him long enough. You utilized one assessment. You did a number of things. And so, you know, after that, I had a lot of distrust for, you know, that particular school and that particular leader. It just so happened that there were a number of other moms who had come in that year who had Black and brown boys who I had befriended because we met each other at the sort of new students, and they came in different grades as well. And when I spoke to those moms were going through the exact same experience. So I was able to advise them because I had been on a child study team and say, this is what you do. Because they went forward in the meeting process, I stopped it immediately. And I said to the principal, I want you to treat my child the way you would treat another child where you made certain assumptions about their family and their resources. If my son needs tutoring, I will provide it. Just like any of his white counterparts, you would allow them to have that same thing, right? And so my story is the opposite of Mel's, in that there were assumptions made because he is a Caucasian boy and my son is Black. And so from there, I was very, very concerned about what was happening. And every chance I got, I was in that school doing reading groups and anything I could, just so I could see what was happening in the classrooms. Because coming into a suburban district, I made certain assumptions that it's a mixed, you know, a more diverse environment. I made assumptions that there was equity that was taking place, and there was all of these things that were taking place, and it wasn't. And so after that, you know, things were fine, and my son continued. He did well academically, and there was never another mention. But what it said to me was, it made me really start to do research on Montclair public schools, right? My son is in middle school now. He's in the 6th grade. And one of my passions outside of special education has always been the achievement or the opportunity gap. And what happens when Black and brown kids are educated in a system from K through 12, or they come into the system where we are corralling our Black and brown children and where we're placing them, and what's going on with the educators who are, right? Not saying that it's just a problem in Montclair, because it's a problem in education. In fact, the opportunity gap is a problem globally in many places that you go to. The that I had was watching this process happen with my son, but I'm a person who has more information than some of the other parents, and I was able to utilize that and also show them that, like, here you're out of order with the system, right? Because you should have communicated with me first. I should have been a part of this meeting. I am a stakeholder, a person in this as well. And so you completely removed me, and maybe you made certain assumptions, maybe you didn't, but I was there and able to show up and help some of the other parents through the process. And so for me, it was very telling about what happens to Black and brown children in education. Mary Frances Winters wrote this amazing book. It's Black Fatigue, and it talks about how Black and brown children as early as kindergarten recognize when there is an issue with the teacher and it has to do with their race, right? As early as kindergarten, we and other children recognize that there is a disconnect here and there are things happening to me that may not be happening to my counterparts. And so that's very interesting because children come home and say, my teacher doesn't like me, or this person feels this way. And we say, no. And maybe it's not that, maybe it has to do with the system and how we view Black and brown children when they show up. When public education started, when Horace Mann, who's one of the, the inventors of the system of public education, and it comes out of Massachusetts, at that time, there were not Black and brown folks who had their children in schools. And so even the inception of public education, which is a wonderful opportunity, because I look at all of this as an opportunity for us to do better. But when the system was created, many of us were not there and we weren't a part of the inception of all of it and the ideals behind it. And at that time, they were trying to build people who could enter into eventually, jobs and positions and be able to follow directions. But when we look at education now, we have to understand a lot of what happens in the world is really mirrored. This district is a microcosm of that. So systemically, what happens, it happens within schools. And so one of the things like I am passionate about is us understanding equity and not equality. It's not a one size fits all. Melanie's son is someone who needed something different than like, here's what we present in the classroom, and not understanding that all students have strengths. Everybody walks into the school with strengths. But if we look at students and people from a deficit model, then we'll never see that the strengths that the students have, each of them. And so we need all kids, all learners to come to school and feel good about themselves and feel good about them and themselves in that space, all children. And so when we're talking about equity, we can benefit if we say, here's what we're doing for children in special education, and the teachers get the training that they need. Here's what we're doing to reduce the achievement gap with Black and brown students, where we know in our district, Black boys are 1.6 times more likely to be put into special education, to be sent out of district, and a number of other things. If we are able to reach all learners, and those learners who are not this traditional standard of what the model of education wants a learner to look like, if we can reach all those students, it benefits every student because it makes the classroom a greater place. And so how do we know that the achievement gap exists and it's ongoing? Because we can look at standardized testing, we can look at dropout rates, we can look at college completion rates. There's a number of things that we can look at to see where we are being impacted. And it does start early. As Melanie pointed out, it starts, when kids enter kindergarten. Black and brown students are 7 or more months behind in reading, 9 or more months behind in math, and then it continues from there if we don't take the opportunities as she talked about before that. And for those kids who have always slid through and the gaps that happen, because that just continues to grow as we go through each year of school. We really have to do the work. Exactly. I can see the chat box. So yes, that is a huge thing, but that is a huge and wonderful thing. But it's something that we have to tackle as a society. There was a small time in the 1970s where the achievement gap started to close, right? Because there were all these federal programs, there was universal pre-K, there were all of these things happening. Achievement gap started to close, and then it widened again because the we got rid of a lot of those programs as a country. And so what drives me is equity. What drives me is that, you know, teachers need the training that they need. I'm sorry, I'm looking at what's being typed and talking at the same time. Teachers need training. Teachers need professional development around a number of things. We all have to understand that we are stakeholders. The teachers are stakeholders, parents are stakeholders. You know, as Ms. Herzog so eloquently said, you know, the board is here to represent the students and really push policy and do the things that we need to do for students and show up for them. But we all need to come together and understand, here are the greater goals. Here are the things. $928 to, you know, to eradicate the achievement gap and get in, you know, the assessments that we need, and work through the issues of special education, because the last achievement gap report was done in 2015 and we have not done all of the recommendations. And so we need another one. And we need to, because these are things that we need to be checking in. Thank you, Ms. Herzog, for being on, you know, the task force. We have these brilliant task force in town and these people who come together, these wonderful thinkers. We get these reports done, and then what happens with the recommendation? Same thing happened with the special education report. And so my goal, clearly our goal, is to assure that we are meeting the needs of all learners, not because every student should be the ideal student, right? As a therapist, people are like, you need to have a niche, you need to have, nope. Anybody who needs help, who needs that's who I serve. Right? They show up, they're sort of ready in the best way that they can be. They don't need to be perfect or do anything of that nature. And so we need to continue to push policy and push our district, because we have reports with amazing recommendations. You should read the recommendations on the AGAP report. You should read the recommendations on the special education report. A lot of them intersect, and really just doing things from either or would solve a lot of the problems of the other population of students. And so, yes, I'm here because I'm passionate about equity in so many things, but I want our school system to be equitable and not equal for all students.
Well, thank you, Phaedra. That was awesome. And we are grateful for the insight that you shared from the experiences you've had in the Montclair system. And so now we're ready to transition into a dialogue. And I am elated to bring to the forefront our brother, Mr. Sergio Gonzalez. He's a parent of 2 children. He's an executive at an IT firm. He is a former Montclair Board of Education member. He is a director of Vote Montclair, an advocate for equity and voting rights. He's a first-generation Cuban American. He believes that the American dream is achievable, but it requires empowerment of our children and families through a high-quality public educational system. And we welcome you to be our moderator for the evening. There are some conversations that have been happening in the chat. And so I want to see if I can I want to see if I can create a panel here. So why don't you go ahead in whatever way you decide to proceed, and I'm going to see if I can create a panel where everybody can see all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm blessed and honored to be here. It really takes a village, and I appreciate everyone. And thank you for being part of my village. So anyway, such strong, intelligent individuals on this panel. I'm humbled. My journey has been long and circuitous, and it starts and ends with the values that have been ingrained in me by my parents. And, you know, we just have to invest in our community and family and bring it all together. So anyway, I guess I want to start a couple questions I have. I want to kind of start high level. And I don't know, I guess we could start with maybe Ms. Herzog, if we start this round, right? And then we'll kind of switch it around if that's okay. But, you know, I know you kind of dug in a little bit about the structure of school boards, right? But I'd like to kind of hear everyone's point of view, why you feel that the school boards are actually necessary and the role that the policy plays in the functioning of the school boards, right? So why are they necessary, and what role does policy play in the functioning day-to-day of a school board?
So I'll give you one example of why they're important, pro and con. So a con is, if you look at the news these days, school boards are banning books. If you have the wrong people on your school board, your children aren't going to be allowed to read things that the board decides are not politically acceptable to their particular political leanings. And that's mildly terrifying to me and horrifying to me. So it's incredibly important in that sort of negative sense not to have people on the school board who are ideologues, political ideologues, who might in fact end up really distorting the education that our children receive. I too have a high school student. On the pro side, many people are surprised to learn that when it comes to policy, the policies that are not in Montclair are shocking to people sometimes. When I was the president of the board, we created an anti-discrimination and equity policy. Montclair did not have one. There wasn't one. There was no overarching policy in the Montclair school system that talked in detail about not discriminating against certain kinds of students. Now, was it the case that many of the things that were in that policy were de facto were happening? Sure, but technically, if they weren't happening, nobody was breaking any rules. And so you need a board that is going to set policies that embody the values and the priorities of the community that you live in, whether it's about anti-discrimination or whether it's about making sure kids have access to certain educational opportunities. There's a huge array of policies. And by the way, those of you on this call, you can go to the district website and those policies there's a link to every single board policy. The policy is what the board sets, and then how to make them actually happen is the regulations. And that's what the superintendent and the employees set. So those policies and then the regulations for how you enact those policies are available to you and searchable on the district website. So if there's something you're wondering about and you think, gosh, that must violate a policy, that thing that just happened to my kid, go search on the website, because it's incredibly powerful to be able to go to the district and say, actually, I'm not just complaining about that thing that happened because I don't think it's a good idea. I'm complaining because you're violating your own policy.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. All right. So we'll just kind of start it off like we did originally, and then we'll go Mel, then Phaedra. All right. So why are school boards necessary? And we'll talk about, what role does the policy play in the functioning of these school boards?
I don't know if I can add a whole lot of to what Ms. Herzog said, but I do believe like it's really important to recognize that the board is almost like the eyes and ears of the community that we serve, as a link between the public, our community, and the administration. And I think given when people don't always feel heard and that there's issues around communication, I think this will be especially important for the current board to address. And the policy, clearly, as you've heard this whole talk, the board sets the policy that guides the superintendent's actions. So as Laura also said, you want to make policy that's reflective of your educational values. And yes, I don't have a lot else to add to Laura's wisdom.
No worries, no worries. Phaedra.
Thank you. It's following these two wonderful women, but I think we have to think of ourselves as, right, we serve the community. We're community people, right? But I think more importantly is our responsibility is to improve student outcomes, all students, right? And yes, that's through the policies that, maybe checking and making sure that the regulations look a way that, that they're supposed to, or they're benefiting the children that they're supposed to benefit. So really, yes, policy, everything these wonderful women said before me, but also like the goal being student outcomes, because each year we want to move student outcomes and produce greater results, greater things for the students by any means necessary, right? And so that's just to add.
Wonderful, thanks. All right, so we'll go Melanie, Phaedra, right, and then Ms. Herzog. All right, so what are the current challenges facing education and school boards? And if you want to talk, in the country or in Montclair, or your point of view, you kind of take that one wherever you want.
Okay. I guess I feel like a lot of the nation's problems are reflected also in Montclair. So I would go with, the opportunity gap and the resultant achievement gap. And it's in Montclair too, the unequal and inadequate educational opportunities. So I feel like I also think this is a huge issue for the district, and it's also one where the district and the community have an opportunity to interact, because there's bigger issues like universal pre-K, affordable housing, affordable healthcare, transportation. All these things interact within both the community and the school to affect the opportunity gap. Across the country, COVID learning loss, that's going to be a huge one for districts to deal with, how to make sure kids are catching up. The social and emotional health of our kids, which, for the past couple of years, there's been rising anxiety and depression, but it's only been further exacerbated by COVID. And in Montclair in particular, I think there's clearly infrastructure concerns, resultant budget concerns. And I think we really need to take a hard look at our hiring practices. So who the teachers and staff we see in the school are a reflection of the students we serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Um,
Phaedra.
Great start. I always tell people when we talk about Montclair, these are educational issues. I worked in other districts and I'm like, listen, I wish I could tell you it was just strictly here, but these are overall educational issues. But when we are looking at Montclair, clearly facilities, achievement gap, equity, special education. I was like writing a list and I couldn't stop, health and wellness, because we want a healthier lunch program for our students. Like, right, there should be healthier choices and things. Social emotional learning as a therapist, that's really humongous for me. Character education. A big thing that, like, what I find where we can improve, although, I see the efforts, but we need to assess and put data to better use in its fullest capacity, because I think we're missing an opportunity here to take the data we've already collected. Like I said, we have all these great reports and these great think tanks that have happened, and the report gets done and it's hard to, we seem to be struggling with getting it out there, but we've really got to take a look at data and use it more, right? Parent and student surveys would be an important element to add yearly so we could see really where issues lie. But so many things, so much, we could just sit here forever naming things.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
So
Laura.
Thank you. I will not name anymore except I will say that I echo everything that these two women have already said. The one thing that I will say, and I will make a pitch for advocacy on this too, is an underlying point, which is none of those challenges can be met without sufficient resources. You may notice I keep coming back to this issue. One of the things you need to understand, and that people forget when it comes to the funding of our schools, there is a state funding formula. There is an approved state funding formula that the state has a number. They look at every district, how many kids you have, how many special needs kids you have, all sorts of factors. And they come up with that number and say, this is how much your district needs from the state to function appropriately. That's a theoretical number. When the legislature and the governor pass a budget, you get what the budget says you get. You don't necessarily get that number. And Montclair in the last 10 years has been underfunded by millions and millions of dollars. The state acknowledges what we need from the state, and then they don't give it to us. It's not just us, a lot of districts. So something that, again, I'm making a pitch for advocacy here. There's only so much our district and our board can do with the resources it has. People need to be louder with our state legislators and our governor about appropriately funding our districts and not starving public education. because that's what's happening. They're saying how much we need and intentionally giving us less. And the longer that goes on, the more cuts we end up having to make. So that's a tremendous challenge that underlies all the others.
Wonderful points. Thank you so much. All right, so Phaedra, you're up. Then Laura, then Melanie. All right, so we'll just try to get this flowing like this, right? So, okay, so let's talk about, your service. Let's talk, it's more like this is good, Laura, that we'll kind of switch this around, but so in what ways have you been in service to public education, prior to either having had been on the board or your experience on a board or becoming a candidate for the board, right? So let's talk about some of, the experience that you've got there, some of the service that you've done, and try to understand a little bit more about you.
Well, first and foremost, let's take it way back. I went to public school, right? So I attended public school myself. I'm a product of public education, but I think even more importantly, when I started in the field of social work, I was like first day, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, sent into the field, and I had to go to a school meeting. And I was this very young woman, and I was clueless because I didn't even know that IEPs existed. And I had to go in and represent a student, and there was no one there for this child who was, part of the foster system. And I had to quickly get myself together because I was being sent into these meetings and no one gives you any information. And what's that? Advocating how to do that. And so my first sort of lesson happened there. And then eventually I began working in education. And as you guys heard, I've been a child study team leader. I have been a school administrator, a dean. I've done a number of things K through 12. And so here on a more local level, I have worked with the Sister to Sister program, which has been an amazing look at a number of things I would not have known about the district because my son was in elementary school and then middle school. But having the opportunity to be co-chair of the DEI committee for PTAC, being on school PTAs, talking to people, being a co-founder of Montclair Moms of Color, and just the robust conversation and things I've heard from people who were born and raised here, for those of us who have moved into district. And so is probably everyone here, I've spent my life being in service to public education because, like many of us here on the panel and just here, we went to public schools. So.
Wonderful.
So professionally, I spent about half my life in public higher education at William Patterson and at Hunter College. So that was my professional thing. And then as far as the Montclair public schools, my son, as I said, is a junior now in high school, although I will tell everybody he's not in Montclair High this year. I took him out because he was not being served well during COVID times. He'll be back next year, I hope. But I also have a niece at Glenfield and a nephew at Bradford. And I am Auntie Laura I was Ryan's mom, and then I became Auntie Laura to many classes of students at Bradford, because my biggest and most happy contribution to the public education system in Montclair was that I was the craft mom and then the craft aunt. And I went in and I did crafts on every holiday for all of my son's classes until the teachers kicked me out in 5th grade, and then for all my niece's classes, and then for all my nephew's classes. And it was a great way to get to know all sorts of kids, get to know all sorts of teachers, and become really involved in and understand the lives of the school, where my son and niece and nephew were. Although it was kind of hilarious when I would, and I still have this happen when kids come up to me on the street and say, "Hi, Auntie Laura," and their parents look at me like, "I don't know who she is. That's disturbing." While I no longer do that and I'm no longer on the board, I would say that was probably the happiest moment of my contribution to the Montclair Public Schools.
I guess I would talk about it really did bring me joy being able to be in the schools with my boys throughout their years, especially in the elementary school, volunteering for whatever activity, being a math tutor down at Nishawane, going on field trips. And I've been on the PTAs at Nishwain, Hillside, Glenfield, and the high school. At Nishwain, I ran a program called Grow Lab, which focuses on using the garden to teach science and nutrition concepts, and that was really a really great experience. And then as my kids went into special ed and stuff, got involved with CPAC. I'm the CPAC liaison at Glenfield. And I also got involved with the NAACP. I'm on the Ed Committee and I'm on the Dyslexia Task Force. I've spoken at the Civil Rights Commission. And I've just found it all really rewarding. And I think, like Laura said, it's really important to be involved in your own school community and get to know the teachers, get to know the principal, and make your voices heard.
Okay. So thank you very much. So I want to kind of start digging into some of what, in my experience, right? I'm a parent. I was on the board, and coming from both sides, I'd like to understand your points of view, right? And I guess Melanie, we'll start with you, and then we'll go Laura Phaedra, right? Let's talk about the district communication. What's your point of view on district communications? Are you happy? Can we improve it? Just, give me your experience, and, based off of that, iterate on, any improvements if you feel that they need to, or if they're good, we can just move on.
I think there's two separate issues: the communications that come from the district, the emails from the high school, the emails from the other schools. I feel, especially at the high school, my personal opinion, like too much information. It's like an overwhelming amount of information. And I know they want to keep you aware of everything, but I think the thing is hit delete, because it's too much. Like, there needs to be emails that are directed at, this is an emergency, like your kid, you have to do your kid's schedule right now, versus maybe like a monthly newsletter about, these are all the cool events we're celebrating this month, and these are all the cool things that happened, and all the clubs you can sign up for, or utilize the websites better. That would be my opinion about that. And then there's the other, what we frequently hear about, is communication with board members. And it's just kind of a strange, like, you can utilize your 3 minutes and then you aren't sure where that information goes. And I do think people are heard, but it's hard sometimes to know how the feedback's incorporated. So I think there's a lot of suggestions for that, maybe the board starts doing community walks or town halls. There's informal coffee hours, and maybe at different times, like evenings for those people that works for, maybe some in the afternoon for folks that might work an evening shift. I think the board can make itself more accessible. And then the board has to make it clear that they're incorporating the feedback or the questions they do get into the decisions they make. It can't just be like, we heard, because I have heard this complaint and this complaint from teachers. They talked to us, they asked for our opinion, but then they just went blah. And that's not an effective way to communicate or take feedback from the community.
Yeah, I would say, I would echo those things. I would also say, just to be very blunt, the district needs to be better about being accurate. There's too many times when we receive emails from the district saying, this is a thing that you should know. And then 20 minutes later, we get one saying, correction, that date was wrong. Correction, that's not actually the person that you talked to. Correction, we didn't mean to send that to you. That was actually supposed to be for somebody else's kid. And I understand that the district is very busy. I understand that there are very busy employees, but these are our kids. And if you're going to be sending us information, you need to do a better job. You need to be accurate, because if you undermine our trust in your ability to communicate with us about our children, that unfortunately grows into a bigger trust problem. And you wonder what else is not getting done right and isn't getting caught. So I think, I think that there's goodwill. but I think it would be better if they were more careful, just took a couple more minutes. I also agree with the point about the board. When I was on the board at the end, and again, just to make sure everybody understands, I am not a candidate. I am not a candidate. I am a former board member. I wouldn't, anyway. So good luck.
Paid your penance. You've done that, right?
I've done my time. So, but you know, what we would do is at the end of public comment, we would then ask, I would have the superintendent respond to as many things as possible right there and say what we were planning to do going forward. So I think that that would be a good thing for the board to bring back, and or to do what we sometimes did, which was a recap at the next meeting, because sometimes there are things you can't answer in the moment or you can't answer accurately, and say, okay, at the last meeting, these things came up. We'd like to address them in this meeting. And I think that that would give the public more confidence that they are being heard. They may not always be agreed with. You know, it's the thing, does God answer all prayers? Yes, but sometimes the answer is no. So not that I want to clear the board of ed to God, but you know, the answer may be no, but at least you know somebody heard you ask. So that's it.
Phaedra.
Yes, a third. So I'll start with the positive, right? Because I'm going to be strengths-based. My son's individual school, they do a great job at communicating, because it's not this sort of overly filled email that, you know, there's a principal's newsletter that goes out, and I think there's a great amount of information in there. With the district, yes, there need to be improvements for all the reasons that were already stated. What I've also found is, like, the district will communicate something and then it trails off, and you're like, well, wait, what happened next? And what's the next step? And so one of the things I also see in this under communicating that's happening, there starts to be a communication. And then I'm always asking someone, do you know what happened with that thing? Or do you know what happened here? Because the continuation, it didn't continue, the communication. So for all the other things that were said, yes, yes, yes.
All right, so we're going to start with you, then we're going to go Mel and Laura. All right. So there's a big elephant in the room, and the elephant is crumbling. And the elephant is those buildings, right? So let's talk about capital improvements. What are your thoughts? What's the plan? How are we going to be able to address this? You know, where's your point of view? Do we need to repair the buildings, right? Let's just hit that one head on, right? Because obviously it is a challenge, and those buildings have not been touched for a long time, and I've got a very strong opinion about why, but it's not my point to talk, so I'll just let you guys go. So Phaedra.
Yes, my opinion on why it hasn't been touched is not important here. I think that this issue is simple yet complex, right? And so here are the reasons. The buildings are, I think I was reading 18th and 19th century, like, right? So some of the issues, the majority of the buildings when they were built, the upkeep hasn't been where it needed to be. Then you have COVID happen, and now you are really shining a spotlight on the HVAC issues, the heating, cooling, the air being it. So there are a number of things. I think this issue is complex because the elephant is, like, we are moving towards this bond referendum, right? Like, we all know the schools are in disrepair. I'm sure Laura and many people on the call knew that when they were in the school buildings, when the staircase fell, right? And I've worked in urban education. We've never had a staircase fall. And so that's very telling. And so that's concerning. My concern here is for the folks, right? Because in this community, you have people, so I say, yes, our schools need a lot of work done, all of them. Auditoriums, you know, I think it goes like Nishwain Hillside, the high school, you know, our kids shouldn't have to come into an environment like that, because that also impacts how students feel about school. And so that's important to me. But I think that it's complex, and that you have people in whatever the bond referendum, whatever the cost is, we do have to remember there are, you know, the state gives 40% aid and for projects. There are also there are like these improvement plans where we can get some sort of kickback to be able to fix boilers and fix lighting and do things like to help offset some of the cost, where you can get money from the state. The 40% also is money you get from the state to help. So I would love to see us utilize a lot of those things so that we can offset and lessen the impact on the taxpayers, because I worry about our elders, I worry about people in the community who are barely hanging on in Montclair as it is. But do I understand the importance of fixing the buildings so that they can become community spaces, so that you can rent out an auditorium, so that you can do things, because it's a community space and it's a way of learning to utilize them in that way as well. But it's complex, but yes, I do want these projects, these things that they're presenting, phase 2, phase 3, and anything else that needs to happen. I'm sad that we're not talking about sort of like these technology advances that I would love to see for Montclair, because we have to go back to the basics and make sure the schools, there's health and safety as far as as far as the schools are concerned. So that it's huge, but that's just the start of that.
Hey, yes, I agree with what Phaedra said. It is a challenge to be responsible for the taxpayers in this community, and, especially people who will feel the impact the most. But the fact of the matter is, like, we're at a point in our buildings where we need to put the health and safety of our children, in my opinion, above, financial concerns to a certain extent. We can't be careless, but this bond referendum does need to happen. So before they have hired bond counsel, they have hired an architect. I feel long before those seats are filled on, in the March 8th election, I really hope that quite a bit of this planning process has moved on and that the bond is being filled in, because the goal is that the bond has to be filled in and it has to get to the state by May for approval. So I don't think any of us are on this call are privy to the information about exactly how large the bond amount will be. We definitely need a bare minimum, and it sounds so ridiculous, the amount's 20 million to make sure our buildings are safe and that they have good ventilation. But then the ask above that is thinking about repairing the auditoriums, and there could be a return, like renting for community space, making the classrooms up to not the 1960s classrooms, but to meet the demands of a 2025 classroom, a 2030 classroom. What do those educational needs and do those classrooms look like? And as Phaedra said, there are programs, if we utilize them well, the state provides 40% relief in the form of debt service aid. So it actually, while it seems like a huge number, it will lessen the impact that each taxpayer feels. And there's the environmental programs, the ESIP program, where we could the referendum amount could be smaller and you could utilize ESIP to get a larger amount, because it's a budget neutral plan, because the district saves in energy savings and it doesn't really affect the taxpayer. So I think we all have to be in this together. We have to look at the referendum and the whole budget thing as not just a financial document, but a moral document, one that reflects our educational values. And the board's role moving forward after the May 5th, if state approves the plans, will really be interacting with the community and explaining the choices that are in the document and why these things are necessary to happen, and getting the public on board so the referendum passes in November, so the repairs can start happening for the safety of the kids who are in the building. Thank you.
100% agree. And there needs to be a sense of urgency. I mean, that's what I will say for the people who get on the board for now, people who get on the board and going forward, because we're nowhere near having 2025 classrooms. I mean, the sad, depressing fact is that, as Phaedra said, except Bullock, all of our buildings are approximately 100 years old. When I was on the board, there was one year we were all excited about some things we're going to do, some updates that we were going to do with a chunk of money. And about a month before school started, we found out we couldn't spend any of that on what we had hoped to do because there were chunks of mortar coming off the roof of one of our buildings, as in those would kill a child if they fell on a child's head. I'm not exaggerating. People would have died if those had fallen on somebody's head. So all that money that was going to go to not a particularly glamorous repair had to instead go to making sure we were, gluing back on the pieces that were falling off of the buildings. So this bond referendum has to go through. It has to be taken seriously. It has to be advocated for. And it's going to be the first of a few, folks. And I 100%, unless the board makes the effort to get the state matching funding, to get the environmental matching funding, and do everything it can to take the burden off of the taxpayers, the board will not be trusted to steward that money appropriately. So I'm really glad to hear what both of you said, because that's the only way to make this at all palatable, because this is going to be a heavy lift. And this board needs to be serious, diligent, urgent, and careful and frugal.
Wonderful, thank you. I guess let me just flip it around. Laura, Phaedra, Mel, right? This is what we'll do. So do you believe that teachers should have a greater input or voice in the district decisions that impact their work and their students? No,
I do. What I would like to see is that input directly from the teachers. Unfortunately, in the structure that we have, a lot of what comes from these incredibly wonderful teachers that we have is filtered through their union leadership, because those are the only members who convey the information. And no matter how diligent the union leadership may be, it can't fully represent the varying voices of the teachers. So I would love to hear much more directly from the teachers themselves and not hear what they think filtered through another mechanism.
Wonderful, thank you.
I agree. And so there's not a whole lot to say, except, we do have to remember teachers are stakeholders, just like everyone else, and they are a huge player in this. And yes, we do need to listen to teachers, especially, what I would like to see is for teachers be able to say, I want to take this PD because this would grow me as a teacher. I'd like to do these things. So in addition to what the district needs to do to get the offerings for, let's say, getting them, set up for special education and better understanding that, and a number of things that teachers have some sort of agency and ownership in their ability to say, here's what I would like as well. But just as a community, remembering teachers, parents, students, administration, these are all stakeholders. And when we come to sit down, everyone has a stake. I completely agree with Laura. I do wish we could hear more from individual teachers, because I think the impact and the understanding would only grow and become greater.
Thank you.
I also agree with all those statements and would like to really focus on the professional development and how important it is that the teachers have a say in what they get to participate in, because I feel like that's the only way you get really buy-in, that the teachers are really engaged in their professional development and then bring it to the classroom. Like I alluded to before, there's been some talk from the teachers, like they invite us to discussions around curriculum, because in the end, they are experts on what's happening in the classroom. They're invited to discussions around curriculum, only then to be handed something else and with very little training, and that never goes very well. Those things, if we have if teachers participate and we have their buy-in, it works better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So, all right. So, okay, we'll try to make this one quick. It's not really an easy question, but so let's talk about the motivation, right? I think a lot of this has been around the motivation, but and I'll just kind of direct this to Phaedra and Mel, right, Laura, because you already did your time, right? So, okay. So, is there a particular political issue or an issue that motivates you to serve on the board?
I'll take that. One, I don't want to politicize any of this, right? And so let's not use the word political. But what am I passionate about? Equity everywhere, and equity in spaces like special education. Really zeroing in on that opportunity gap. I am somebody's mother. I am a a woman, just a Black woman who wants to see more for our community. And so let me express that I am not a politician. And I don't, this idea of this being political, it is the nature of this sort of beast. But I am passionate in equity and seeing change. Even with our $928, we can still do change, right? We can coupon and whatever else it takes, but we are going to impact change in places, right? And so the key here is me just let's leave the word political out of there. I know we politicize everything in this country, but please let me impress upon everyone here, and you can tell everyone I'm not a politician. I am not political. I'm passionate, and I'm passionate about kids, and I'm passionate about equity. Everywhere we go, everything we look at needs to include that.
I wonder if it would surprise you all if I said literacy. I am so passionate about literacy, the early identification of our kids who are struggling, and really rigorous science-based reading programs in elementary school. And I would say, that is where kids' ability to show up, first of all, to learn to read, to access content, knowledge, vocabulary, but to show up at school and feel good about themselves. Like, it doesn't happen in 8th grade when you're thinking, I might want to take that AP class. It happens in kindergarten and 1st grade when you're doing well and you can read a book. And I show up to school thinking, I can be a successful learner. I feel good about myself. And if I feel good about myself, I can feel good about my friendships with other kids in the class. And, we talk about like, over-identification of Black kids in special ed. Like, you want to know when kids act out and maybe get identified for special ed? It's when you have an academic challenge that you feel you do not have the tools to meet. So I just cannot stress enough how I think really great literacy instruction underpins everything we're trying, the opportunity gap, the resultant achievement gap, everything we're trying to get at as a disequity, that is where it has to begin. And it has to begin in those early grades. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm blessed to have been part of this. I appreciate it. So thank you so much. Pastor, I will pass the microphone back to you, sir.
Thank you to each of our panelists for a wonderful evening and for a rich dialogue and an opportunity to grow in our understanding of the Montclair educational system. Thank you, Brother Sergio Gonzalez. You've done an outstanding job facilitating conversation and pulling out so much understanding from Miss Melanie Deisher, Miss Laura Herzog, and also Miss Phaedra Ruddock Dunn. Our school systems are in better hands when we have these kind of leadership present. So thank you all for the good work you're doing, for your passion, for your commitment and zeal for our children. And we appreciate this time together. We will look to have this recorded. And so this was a lot of information, and we'll see if we can make this available in the near future. I want to just share with you now who will be coming next. And so next we will look to have our leaders from the synagogue, both Rabbi David Greenstein and Rabbi Elliot Temperman, who will be coming to talk about reflections on synagogue life in Montclair. And so they are longstanding members and leaders of these respective houses of faith, and they have much to share with us. So let's tap into them and learn as we seek to be better neighbors and relate to others who may have different faith perspectives than us. Let's come out and be supportive. We are This is Team Us, and we are one community. That is our goal, moving toward community. I'm going to end with a word of prayer. I just want to thank all of you for spending this time with us tonight and this sacrifice. An hour and a half went by exceptionally quick, which means that we really were blessed to have these leaders who kept our attention time. So thank you for your participation in this journey. And the next stop will be our fourth stop of a 10-week journey. So let's pray. God, thank you for your guidance, and thank you for this leadership team, for these people who have shared their hearts and made themselves vulnerable as they talked about the dream and aspirations that you have given them. We thank you for their commitment, and for all those who are running for the board, and for those who are endeavoring to improve the quality of education. What an awesome task and charge that they have accepted. And we pray for your grace that gives strength to help them to do what they cannot do alone. Help us to pull together as a community our resources, including our finances. So bless us on tonight. Give us rest and restoration that we might be able to stand on tomorrow and be ready to serve you again. In the name of our God, we do pray. Let all the people who love our God say amen and amen. Thank you for your time, and we pray that you have a wonderful evening, and we'll share again come next Wednesday.